Welcome to Booking with Deborah. Today's video is a confessional. Yeah, I have finally faced up to the unread physical books in my house. So all of my TBR books in my house, I have finally faced them head on and counted them. So in today's video, I am going to share with you how many unread books I have in my house and have a bit of a chat with you about how it might have got into the situation that it has and what I'm going to do about it over the next year to try and reduce that. The majority of the books in my house are always likely to be unread. I'm the sort of reader that when I read a fiction book, once I've read it, I pass it on. I generally donate all my books to my local charity shops. There'll be some occasions where I will read a non-fiction book and I know it's going to be a book that I'm going to want to revisit, but just maybe flicking back into it. And I have a number of non-fiction reference books which I would keep in my house even if I've read them cover to cover. But the majority of the books get unhauled once I've read them. So most of the books that are taking up space in my house are all actually unread books. So what I've done for the purposes of this video and to enable myself to be a bit more conscious of the books in my house is I've gone round my house in the various different places where I store my books and counted them in each of the different categories. So I've got some notes down here and I'm going to share with you how many I've got of each type of book. So are we ready for the big reveal? Now then, I have, and these are all unread by the way, 7 poetry collections. I think that's fairly respectable. I think that's fine. I'm not worried about that. I've got 9 short story collections, which again, I don't think is too bad, but I probably don't need as many as 9. Maybe I could reduce that a little bit. Little classic books, which are these books here, which you can see, little classics. So they're all the Penguin little classics. There are 16 of those, and as much as they don't take up a lot of space and they fit really nicely on this bookshelf, I don't want to be buying any more of these unless I've reduced the 16 down by quite a bit. Classics and modern classics, which I've sort of pushed together in one category, I've got 36 of those. That feels maybe like it's a bit too many, considering if it's a classic book, it's likely to take me a while to read that. I tend to like to slow read my classics, so I don't think I need as many as 36 in one go in the house unread. Then I've got Read Around the World, which is a specific category of books that I store separately on a specific shelf in my house, which are for my Read Around the World challenge, which is where I'm trying to read a book from each country of the world. It's a long-term thing. I'm sure you've heard all about it if you've been around my channel a little while. But for my Read Around the World challenge books, unread, which are a mix of, they're probably mainly fiction, but there is the odd non-fiction book in there. I have 55 of those unread. That to me feels like too many. Then the fiction category, so this is all of the fiction books I have that don't fit into the Read Around the World category, and that consists of historical fiction, middle grade, some fantasy and fiction with more of a contemporary timeline to it, so more contemporary books. And unread in my house, I have 71 of those. Yep, that feels like too many for me. Given the fact of how many books I read a year, I don't need that many unread in my house. Non-fiction, so I've categorised my non-fiction into 3 different categories for the purpose of my grand count. So the non-fiction that I've got, which is what I'm classing as non-fiction books, which I intend to read and then pass on. So I think I will read them and then donate those books to charity. I have 15 of those. And then I've got a category called non-fiction reference. Now my non-fiction reference books are what I mean as books that they've got lots of factual information in, and they're probably more designed to be picked up and dipped in and out of over a long period of time rather than read from cover to cover. The majority of those books in my house that I've got like that, even if I was to actually read them from cover to cover over a period of time, I envisage that I will be keeping them in the house, okay? I do have a small number that I've looked at and I thought, that's what I would class as a reference book, but if I read it cover to cover, there's a possibility that I might decide I don't need to keep it. So there's 6 of those books. That's not too bad, is it? Just 6. And then we come to the non-fiction reference books, which I envisage keeping even if I've read cover to cover, because I know I'm going to want to go back to them. Non-fiction reference books that I plan to keep even if I've read them is 48. That brings my grand total of unread books to 227. So I have 227 physical books in my house that are mine, that are all unread. There may be people watching this who think that's not that many, I have lots more, or there may be people who are horrified by that amount, I'm not sure. But what I can say is that for me that is definitely too many. I have quite a small house. I have got to the point where I have definitely run out of space. I've been saying for a while, every time I do a book haul, oh, I need to not buy any more books because I'm starting to run out of space. I really have run out of space. And I'm currently storing in a big plastic box under the bed a box of books that are not books that I'm immediately drawn to read straight away. And I would really prefer not to be at the stage where I'm storing under the bed books that I'm not really that inclined to read. I'd rather have all of my books out and I want on show so that I can see them and consider them as possible reads and make sure that the books I want to read. The other thing that I will say is that before I did this grand count, I made sure that I did a good unhaul. So I thought, right, before I face up to the unread books and start tackling them, I will do a good unhaul. Although I say I've got some books under the bed that I'm not that inclined to read as much as others, they are books that I would like to read at some point in the future, rather than being books that I actually want to unhaul. What I thought I would do next is have a little bit of a chat about how I think I might have got to the point of having 227 unread books in my house. Before we do that, I'm just going to have a bit of a slurp of my tea. Oh, that's nice. It's quite a dull day today, so hence my sort of shadow lighting thing that's going on. Because I've had to have all the lights on to get decent lighting. It's very grey, it's quite foggy, and it's sort of drizzly rain, so it's really nice to sit and have a nice cup of tea and not have to worry about going out on a day like today. Anyway, back to my unread books. So how did I get into this situation? I've always had books in my home. I've always been somebody who likes to have a good number of unread books to pick from. And I don't ever want to be one of these people who doesn't have unread books. I know some people like to go and get books, so they either purchase books or they borrow books from the library, they bring them home, they read them, they get rid of them, and then they go buy some more books. So they have a really small TBR. And I can see the appeal of doing that. I can see that it would keep your enthusiasm for reading, because when you do get new books, whether those books that you've borrowed or books that you've bought, there is a kind of desire to want to read them straight away, and I think that kind of keeps your enthusiasm. But I don't want to be one of these people who doesn't always have a selection of books to fall back on, because I am a mood reader. I like to have different books to meet my different moods. There was a point in the past where I feel like some of the books that were on my bookshelves had probably got a bit tired. It got to the point where I felt a bit lost with finding books that I wanted to read. So I had these books on my shelves. Most of them I think I'd probably bought from local charity shops, if I'm honest. I wasn't a big buying books brand new. And I was a member of a few Facebook book groups, trying to find new books to read. but it just felt like the only books people were talking about were what I would call sort of mass market commercial books, and they were books that I just wasn't interested in reading. And at this point I didn't really borrow much from my local library. I would go into the local library to get the odd reference book or non-fiction book. And then the year 2020 happened, which I don't need to go into. Everybody across the world knows what the year 2020 was all about. I don't think we need to revisit it. But I found myself faced with a pile of books that I just was not that interested in reading when we went into the lockdowns. The shops were obviously closed, the libraries were closed, and I went into a massive reading slump, and I just felt really a bit stuck with these books. And somebody mentioned something, I think on one of the Facebook groups, about this thing called booktube. And then that was it. Down the rabbit hole of booktube did I go. And throughout probably all of 2020 and quite a bit of 2021, I found myself binge watching booktube videos and studying my library catalogue. So even the times when the library was closed, you could still go online and look at the library catalogue and see what books they had, and you could still start creating different wish lists. And what I've realised looking back at that time was I was using watching booktube videos and finding possible new books that I might be interested in reading, and studying my library catalogue and creating all these different wish lists and things that I wanted. I found that a real comfort actually, and it gave me somewhere to escape into, which was not the real world as it were, and it also gave me a sense of a future in which the library would open again, because at points it was like, are we ever going to come out of lockdown? And charity shops would open again and bookshops would open again, and I would have this huge list of books that I wanted to read. So it kind of made me give that sense of hope as well, so escapism and hope at the same time. It was a strange time, wasn't it, 2020? I think the other thing that happened is during the lockdowns, a number of people were obviously sorting through things in their house, so they were all having a really good declutter. And so when the charity shops opened up, the charity shops were inundated with donations, and that included lots of actually really good and really interesting books that people had either read during lockdown and then wanted to get rid of, or they'd had sitting on their shelves for years and decided to make space of. And I was there hoovering up from the charity shops quite a few of those books and adding them to my shelves to be read. And then I had the idea quite a bit before I started my own channel about reading around the world. So I had this idea to try and read a book from every country in the world. It's a long-term, possibly lifelong challenge. So I also started acquiring books for that challenge. And I also wanted to make sure that I always had a good selection of books on my shelves, so that regardless of what sort of mood I would be in, that there were books that I really was looking forward to reading. That is a bit of the backstory of how I came to acquire so many unread books. I would say the majority of the fiction unread books and some of the non-fiction books in my house have been acquired since 2020. Quite a few of the non-fiction reference books, which are books I envisage probably keeping, have been around for a while. I've got to the stage now, because of the amount of books that I've got that are unread and the space that they're taking up, that I'm starting to recognise that I've tipped the balance in terms of having a good selection of books to pick from. They've actually become a pressure, having all these books. It's gone too far the other way is what I'm trying to say. So my aim for this year is to try and reduce the amount of unread books in my house, and to acknowledge that there are other ways of coping with sort of difficult times and stress than going to charity shops and buying books. You know, it's not something that I'm not putting myself on a book buying ban. I'm not saying I can't go into any shops if I see an independent bookshop or a charity shop on a book I've always wanted. I'm not saying I'm never going to buy any books or I'm putting myself on a book ban for this year, but I really want to make a real effort to read some of the books on my TBR shelves and reduce that 227 number. So my plan is that I am not going to put any pressure on myself to read the non-fiction reference books. So that sort of 48-ish books that are on my shelves, I'm excluding that from the list. At some point I want to focus on reading some of them cover to cover and seeing whether they are to be kept, but that might be a project for further down the line, maybe next year. I want to focus on the remainder of the books, which is the 179 books that I've got that are unread, which are fiction, some non-fiction, memoir, that type of thing. I'm not going to put a figure on it, I don't think. Or am I? Let me know in the comments down below whether you think I should put a figure on how many of my TBR books I'm going to read this year. Whether I should challenge myself and push myself to a particular number. I read about 57 books last year, but a good amount of those were audio books. So we need to be realistic about how many books I'm realistically going to read. You know, I'm not going to be cutting that 179 figure by half or anything like that, because I'm just not that scale of a reader. But what I am going to be doing on my channel over the next year is celebrating every book that I do read off my TBR or I unhaul. So if I start reading a book from TBR and I think, actually I don't want to read this, I'm going to DNF it and I'm going to unhaul it. So any books that get read and unhauled I will be celebrating, and I will count how many that is over the course of the year. I would really love to know in the comments what your approach is to unread books. Are you a bit like me, where you've got a whole host of unread books, all sorts of different genres on your shelves, filling up space? Or are you one of those other people who goes out and gets books either from the library or borrows books from friends and family or buys books, brings them home, reads them and then unhauls them? Or do you sit somewhere in the middle? How many unread books have you got? Do you know how many unread books you've got? Do you want to know how many unread books you've got? Is it something that you would find useful or not? And also, if you think I should set myself a target of how many TBR books I will actually read or DNF and unhaul over the course of the year, and if you think I should set a target, what do you think the target should be? That's it for today's video. Thank you very much for watching. Take care. Bye.